A judge in Pennsylvania sentenced a 14-year-old girl to months in a juvenile detention facility for making a fake MySpace page about her vice principal. The hearing lasted less than 2 minutes. She had no lawyer. She left in handcuffs while her mother stood in the courtroom and screamed. That judge was driving a Mercedes and had just deposited $997,000 into a secret bank account. This is the story of Kids for Cash, the most brazen judicial corruption scandal in American history, and the one that somehow most people have never heard of. Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, 2003. Not exactly a place that makes national headlines. Mid-size, working class. The kind of town where the courthouse is the most important building on the block, and the judge is basically God. Judge Mark Ciavarella had been on the bench for years. Respected. Feared, the way judges usually are. He wore the robe, banged the gavel, gave speeches about accountability and consequences. He also had a problem. He wanted money, a lot of it, and a judge's salary, solid, comfortable, government guaranteed, wasn't scratching the itch. So he made a phone call. The deal Robert Powell was building something, a private juvenile detention center called PA Childcare out in the woods of Luzerne County. Beautiful facility, new construction. One major issue, he needed bodies to fill it. See, private prisons, including juvenile ones, make money per head. Empty beds are lost revenue. The business model only works if the pipeline stays full. And Powell had just built a 96-bed facility that needed a steady stream of kids to stay profitable. Ciavarella and his colleague Judge Michael Conahan worked out an arrangement. Powell would pay them. They would deliver kids. Not in those exact words. Never in those exact words. The payments were routed through shell companies, disguised as consulting fees, laundered through a real estate development in Florida. Very clean, very professional. The kind of thing that takes forensic accountants months to untangle. The total payout, $2.6 million. In exchange, Ciavarella and Conahan did two things. Conahan used his position to defund the county's existing juvenile detention facility, cutting its budget until it closed. Now, there was nowhere else to send kids. Then Ciavarella started filling Powell's beds. The machine was running. How it worked here is what made this different from ordinary corruption. Ciavarella didn't just take the money and occasionally rubber stamp a questionable sentence. He went into overdrive. He sentenced kids at a rate that should have raised alarms immediately. Except everyone in the courthouse was either intimidated, confused, or quietly going along with it. Between 2003 and 2008, over 2,500 juveniles were processed through Ciavarella's courtroom. He had a style, fast hearings, minimal conversation. If a kid came in without a lawyer, and many did, because nobody told them they needed one for a minor hearing, Ciavarella would advise them to waive their right to counsel. Quick and easy. Sign here. It'll go better for you. Then he'd sentence them. Sometimes before the kid even understood what was happening. The offenses that landed children in detention: shoplifting a $4 jar nutmeg, possessing drug paraphernalia, which turned out to be a piece of straw, getting into a fistfight at school, trespassing in an abandoned building, writing a note. That MySpace page from the beginning of this video. Kids who had never been in trouble before. Kids with no record, no history, nothing. Pulled out class, driven to a courthouse, processed in 90 seconds, handcuffed in front of their parents, and shipped off. Some of them didn't come home for months. The kid Sandy Fonzo's son was sentenced by Ciavarella as a teenager. He spiraled after his detention. The system that was supposed to rehabilitate him destroyed him instead. He killed himself at 23. At Ciavarella's sentencing hearing years later, Sandy walked up to him in the hallway outside the courtroom. Cameras caught it. She got in his face, voice breaking, screaming at him, "My kid is gone." Ciavarella looked at her and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." That's it. That's what he had. Philip Swartley was 17 when Ciavarella sent him away for a minor offense. He spent his senior year of high school in a detention facility, lost his college scholarship, his whole trajectory, gone. His parents hired lawyers, fought back, screamed into a system that did not want to hear them. They were told the judge had discretion. These things happen. Move on. Hillary Transu, the girl with a MySpace page, was an honor student. No priors, no record, never been in trouble. Her parents walked into that courtroom expecting a lecture and a slap on the wrist. She got 3 months. Her mother said she didn't recognize her daughter when she came home. Something had changed. Something that didn't change back. Multiply this by 2,500. The part nobody caught here's the insane thing. People noticed. Lawyers noticed that kids were waiving counsel at unusual rates. Juvenile advocates noticed the sentencing numbers were off the charts compared to other counties. Parents complained. Some filed appeals. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court looked into it, briefly, and initially found nothing to be immediately alarmed about. A local newspaper, the Wilkes-Barre Times-Leader, started running stories. The reporters were essentially working the story alone. No major national outlet picked it up. No federal investigation launched. Ciavarella kept going. He wasn't hiding. Exactly. He wasn't being careful. He was operating in the open, in a courthouse, in front of court reporters and bailiffs and lawyers, sentencing children to a facility he was secretly paid to fill. The audacity of it was a camouflage. Nobody assumed a judge would be that brazen. That's actually how the biggest frauds work. They're not hidden in back rooms. They're done in plain sight, in nice clothes, with the right title in front of name. To collapse the IRS found the money, not a whistleblower, not a brave lawyer. The Internal Revenue Service, doing what the IRS does, noticed unreported income in Ciavarella's financials. They started asking questions. The questions led to Powell. Powell led to the shell companies. The shell companies led to the $2.6 million. In 2009, both Ciavarella and Conahan were charged with federal crimes. Conahan took a plea deal. Conahan got nearly 17 years. Ciavarella did something different. He rejected the plea deal the prosecutors offered him, stood up in court, looked at the charges, and decided with a straight face that he was going to fight it. His defense was essentially that he didn't do anything wrong. The payments were legitimate consulting fees. His sentencing decisions had nothing to do with the money. He was a good judge. He stood by his record. The jury deliberated for 10 hours. Guilty on 12 of 39 counts. He was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. He'll be in his 90s if he ever gets out. During sentencing, the judge handling the case told Ciavarella that he had traded the lives of children for money, that he had poisoned the well of justice, that what he did was nothing short of catastrophic. Ciavarella, from what observers in the room described, showed very little emotion. The aftermath nobody talks about. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court vacated approximately 4,000 juvenile adjudications tied to Ciavarella's courtroom. Think about what that means. For 1,000 cases, thrown out, which means 4,000 kids were sent away on sentences that a state Supreme Court essentially ruled were illegitimate. The system caught it years later, after the damage was already done. The records were expunged, the convictions wiped. But here's the thing about expunging a record. It doesn't expunge a year you spent in a detention facility at 16. It doesn't put back the scholarship you lost. It doesn't bring back the person who came out different than the person who went in. The paperwork got cleaned up. The kids didn't. Powell, the man who built the facility and paid the bribes, initially received a light sentence. Then federal prosecutors came back. He eventually received 7 years. He got out. He moved on. PA Childcare, the facility built specifically to profit from this scheme, eventually closed. The building is still there. What does actually IS people talk about this story as a corruption scandal, as a crime story? One bad judge, one bad deal, one broken county. That's the comfortable version. The less comfortable version is that the scheme worked for 5 years because every pressure valve that should have caught it, defense attorneys, oversight bodies, appellate courts, local media, other courthouse officials, either failed, moved slowly, or didn't have enough power to stop a sitting judge. The system didn't expose Ciavarella. A tax audit did. And the private juvenile detention industry that created the financial incentive for this deal in the first place, still operating. Different companies, different counties, different states. The business model, get paid per kid, keep the beds full. Didn't go anywhere. Ciavarella is in federal prison right now. He's 74 years old. He has appealed his sentence multiple times. Every appeal has been denied. Sandy Fonzo's son is still dead. Hillary Transu, the honor student with a MySpace page, became a victims' rights advocate. She speaks about what happened to her. She does interviews. She hasn't stopped talking about it since the story broke. Someone has to